AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Henrik Gehrmann. Henrik is the VP of Engineering at Clear Labs. Henrik, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, JP.
It's our pleasure. So, Henrik, let's start with yourself. Can you give us a brief background of your career path in technology, where you got started, some of the roles you've held along the way, taking us up to today as you're the VP of Clear Labs?
I grew up in Germany. My first computer was a Commodore 64, and that's really how I got involved with computing and software, and something I never really stopped loving. I studied in Copenhagen, and that's really where my first encounter with AI happened. There was some class around machine learning. This was at a time when you access the internet using the Mosaic browser, so very early stage. And I'm not sure you've heard the term AI winter, but basically AI always went through cycles of excitement and then disappointment. And that was one of those times where AI was hyped up, but the infrastructure wasn't there. It wasn't ready that time. Anyway, for me, I heard about this magical place called Silicon Valley. This is in the 90s, and I had to check it out. So I moved here, I joined the dot-com frenzy, and fast forward 20 years, half a dozen startups later, I'm now calling this place my home. And it is still amazing me at times. Silicon Valley is a place where you can almost imagine anything and have a chance to make it true.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And clearly you haven't lost the appetite for that, having done, as you mentioned, 6 various startups. But let's focus on today and start with an overview of Clear Labs. So for anyone listening who's not familiar with Clear Labs, can you describe who you are as a business, the mission of the organization, and then give us some insight into the technology behind the scenes?
So Clear Labs is in the biotech space, and we simplify and automate the genetic diagnostics process for the clinical market as well as for the food safety market. Usually when you talk about diagnosing samples on a genetic level, it's a very complex process. So we use NGS, or next-gen sequencing technology, together with robotics and a cloud-based analytical platform to basically democratize this process. And what you get out of that and what we offer to our customers is almost like a turnkey type platform. It's fast, it's very accurate, and it enables customers to detect anything from foodborne pathogens to infectious diseases. And most recently, we have been focused on SARS-CoV-2, or COVID as it's known, and a lot of public health labs in the US actually have adopted our solution as to make it easier to track the various variants that COVID is bringing along.
And thank you for sharing that. So I want to now spend a bit more time understanding the tech behind the scenes that is enabling Clear Labs to achieve such impressive results on these studies. And maybe you can give us some examples, but could you give us some insight into the current makeup of the data team and then your role within that at leading the engineering side?
So as I mentioned, we use NGS, the next-gen sequencing technology, and that alone is already a differentiation from existing qPCR type tests because you have much higher discovery power. You can detect unknown sequences and a much larger number of targets that you otherwise couldn't. In terms of the combination of robotics and the cloud-based analytics, the technologies we use really enable customers to spend very little time on processing or running a test and basically let this system do the work for them. We can return a result within 24 hours or less, compared to a manual process that might take several days today. In terms of the team and the challenges we have on the AI side or AI-related challenges, we do have a bioinformatics team. We have some data engineering team. And at the core of any pathogen detection is the bioinformatic pipeline, where we basically do pattern matching. We look at the raw DNA sequence data and then try to map it against the pathogens that exist, or we identify new subtypes that haven't been found yet. And that technology, of course, is quite complex, but also requires a lot of computational power. So we have a data engineering team that helps provide the system infrastructure necessary to run these processes in an optimal and obviously secure and accurate.
So Henrik, you and I have spoken several times, and you've given me some great examples as to the impact that Clear Labs has been having for your customers, particularly during COVID. Can you share an example of one of your customers who decided to implement the technology and how it allowed them to diagnose and subsequently treat COVID in a much greater speed?
Yeah, absolutely. We have been lucky to work with different public health labs across the US. And in California, of course, we have our presence here. So collaborating with the California Public Health Lab has been very successful. And they have been utilizing our platform to track these variants and new outbreaks across the state, and then have the ability to basically correlate that with findings in other states. We did an internal research project utilizing machine learning to actually predict potential outbreak flows. For example, the UK variant first appeared here on the West Coast. We could, with a good level of accuracy, predict the potential flow to other states that this variant would spread to. So those are some of the examples of the current work that we do.
Excellent. Switching back over to the team and the technology that's behind the scenes, your role is leading all things engineering, and within that there's data engineering, working with bioinformatics. Can you give us some insight in what a typical project lifecycle looks like, what it's like to be part of the team on a daily basis, and then give us some insight into what you enjoy most about the work that you and Clear Lab?
The workflow is fairly agile in nature. We basically, of course, are looking at customer needs first and foremost, but at the same time, we also are exploring new ideas. So there is some science research work involved that our team is engaged with to see if there are ways we can maybe find insights or predictions that could be helpful. And again, not just in the COVID space, but even in other markets. I can give you another example. For the food safety product that we have, we built a application that we call environmental mapping. So if there's an outbreak in a food manufacturing plant of, let's say, salmonella that has been detected, we can show that visually on a map for that floor plan on how that outbreak potentially could spread from station to station, giving companies early heads up to prevent further contamination. But coming back to the team, so there is a close collaboration between data engineering, data science, software engineering, and bioinformaticians. And each group has their own responsibility, and I can go more in depth on that, how that works, but it is a process that requires people to obviously collaborate fairly closely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Henrik, to your role specifically, obviously you've worked in many great organizations, and now as the VP of engineering for Clear Labs, can you give us some insight into what you enjoy most about the work that you're doing, the mission, and then the impact that it's having?
In general, I'm somebody who loves technology. I like bleeding edge technology in any shape or form to create something that doesn't exist yet and utilize that to make a difference for the good in the world. And with Clear Labs, obviously, we are improving food safety. We are helping battling infectious diseases. And in my past, I've been working a lot with the SaaS enterprise space, where we utilize analytical systems to do the same thing, to basically optimize workflows, make life easier. And if I look at my experience and would like to maybe pass some of that knowledge on to the next generation, I think it's important that people still follow their dreams and at the same time don't get overwhelmed by the possibilities or maybe by the obstacles that are in front of them. I think it's important to experiment, to play with it. If you look at technology in general, but also AI specifically, it's never been easy to experiment, to play. What I mentioned earlier, my first computer was the Commodore 64. Today, you have NVIDIA V100 GPUs with 640, tensor cores, over 100 teraflops. That power at your fingertips in the cloud enables you to do things today that we could only dream of back then. And that's really what I would encourage people to do today is to go out there and experiment and try things out, because it's never been easier.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think it's a good segue then into how you've gone about building your team at Clear Labs and talking about the types of profiles and people that you look to bring on. But when you're speaking to candidates, what do you tell them about Clear Labs that gets them excited about the opportunity over many others that they might be considering?
Yeah, right now it's a really exciting time for Clear Labs. We recently closed a $60 million Series C funding round. This is to grow our clinical presence and widen our customer base with public health labs and hospitals, and really go towards the near real-time variant tracking solution that I think is in high demand. It's also exciting because we're growing quickly. We're hiring data engineers and data scientists, software engineers, and we're still small enough that there is a lot of responsibility that somebody would take on joining us. There's a great opportunity to contribute on many levels in Clear Labs. The way we are structured, and I think is a good way to structure teams related to data engineering, data science, is basically that you have a combination of 4 different segments: cloud engineers, DevOps, data engineers, and data scientists. Cloud engineers are basically building the system itself, the infrastructure. They're making sure that things are working and running smoothly, the software stack itself. DevOps is infrastructure, right? Making sure that the databases can scale, that the security is in place, etc. Data engineers really look at the data, the aggregation of data sources and how we control, manage, distribute, and process data. That alone is a big role. And data science is really much more on the research side, right? This is where you look at different algorithms, different machine learning models, and see what kind of insights or predictions might be possible. These teams, of course, also work closely with the product marketing team, because at the end of the day, one thing I think is important when you think about the question of, how do I create value with data science? It has to be driven by the product and the market needs, right? What are the pain points that exist in the world, and then try to solve them. And I think at Clear Labs, we have that kind of team structure in place that makes this a very exciting place to work at.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to set up the final question from me, which is, as you look ahead for the future of Clear Labs and the industry and the impact that AI and all of the technology behind it can have, what are you most excited?
I think there is not just Moore's law with the acceleration of computational power, but also now with machine learning and AI, and quantum computing and technologies like blockchain, which is basically just a distributed ledger, but it's a distributed system. Those kind of technologies are really enabling us to create new solutions, not just in the medical or clinical space, but in any space that have simply not been possible to do since the invention of the computer. And that is very exciting. If anybody in the audience thinks that everything is already been done or has been invented, I think quite the opposite is true. We are still at the beginning of what could be an amazing future for humanity.
Excellent. Henrik, thank you again so much for coming on and talking to us today, giving us some insight into Clear Labs as a business, the amazing impact that you guys have been able to have during COVID, and what's in store in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. For more information, contact mark@alldus.com. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.